We have 3 executives here. Amongst the panel here and myself, we have over 100 years of experience. But what's interesting is it's very diverse experiences. They introduce each other. My background is in technology, and you'll hear from others who come from financial services, banking, startups in Silicon Valley, very industrial companies like Ford, and now Caterpillar, and now General Electric Aviation. So it'll be, I think, a great myriad of experiences for all of you to tap into over the next hour. It's very exciting to me. I did spend 30 years with IBM. I started when I was 12 in a very special intern program. And then after leaving IBM, I spent 4 years with McKinsey and worked with all industries who were doing CEOs to transform their companies and to grow their companies. So it was very exciting. I got to log 30 countries in my passport, and semiconductors down in Taiwan and cement companies in Heidelberg, like all types of things. And it was for me, that was a very amazing experience. And then I was asked to join an innovation company that was founded by Clay Christensen, if any of you know Clay. So Clay is from the Harvard Business School. He is known as the leader of innovation, disruptive innovation. He has about 9 books out. And he started a firm about 15 years ago helping CEOs who were being disrupted. They would be, this is not an example of someone he helped, but it'd be like BlackBerry, where in 2009 you had 49% enterprise cell phone market share, and then 3 years later you had 2%. So it was like he was trying to help CEOs and companies avoid the disruption and actually have innovation going while they were being good at what they were doing. And so where it comes to my background is I've lived through 30 years of IBM. We've come through some near-death experiences through being disrupted. When we were mainframe, it was client-server, to the personal computer, and then cloud computing. So I've lived through that. And then at McKinsey, what I realized is that CEOs were also concerned about that disruption, and that M&A plays a huge role in helping people accelerate the innovation. So I'm excited to be here with these guys today to talk about that. So one of the things you see in companies that really do well at having diverse leaderships is that the teams that they have what you call a 2D diversity. They're not just born with our heritage and backgrounds, but they have a unique experience of what they've brought to the table. So it's not that you just have an Asian person in your management team, but they have a unique experience. So with that, I'm going to go and have Teddy and then Janice and then Naveen share with you a little bit about their background. So in the next hour, you could really connect to where they've been. And then as we go to the last 15 minutes, you could have Q&A and chat with them. So it's kind of like going to be an Uber way to meet these guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Teddy. Can you share a little bit about your background so they can connect with your experiences?
Sure. So I've been for the past year, I've been at Bank of New York, where I manage the technology for the markets business. For those that know a little bit about financial services, the markets business is the part of the bank that trades fixed income products, equities, and derivatives. Before that, I was at Deutsche Bank for 16 years, where I ran the technology for a number of trading businesses, such as rates and credit, commodities, and mortgage-backed securities. And before that, in the late 90s, I was at Morgan Stanley, and in the early 90s, I was at Salomon Brothers. So all of that in financial services in a technology role. Oftentimes people ask me, why do I work in technology at a bank? And I've thought about it, and the reason I do it is because in the last 10 years, as an example, what's happened in technology? There's been, in less than 10 years ago, the Apple iPhone was introduced. In financial services, less than 10 years ago, Lehman collapsed. Being in the middle of technology and finance is two very complex, very change-oriented industries, and being in the middle of that gives you a seat in terms of disruption, in terms of new entrants, in terms of market structure change, in terms of capital forces, that capitalism at work. And it's really interesting to see and be in the front seat watching all of these changes change your industry. They can both be threats, they can both be opportunities. And if you understand both technology and finance, in my view, you can affect a lot of change in the industry that I belong to.
That's great.
I'm Janice Lin, and I started off my career at General Motors as an intern, and I kind of fell into that industry. I was studying engineering, and it was a great summer internship that paid well. So I thought, okay, I'll go there. The next thing you know, I spent my whole career in the industrial space. I spent about 16 years in automotive. Most of it was at Ford Motor Company, just a few of my early years at General Motors, working mostly in engineering, product development, and a little bit in the operations space. I then left the automotive industry into a new industry, which was at Caterpillar, which is a heavy equipment. You probably know that big yellow equipment that you see in a lot of construction sites. I spent the last 9 years at Caterpillar working mostly in the procurement and sourcing space. And most recently, about 1.5 years ago, I went to yet another industrial industry, and I'm at GE Aviation, so aircraft engines. So three very diverse industries, which has been, Moni talked about the diversity of experiences, and I feel like I'm learning every day, learning new industries, learning new environments, and new people. So it's been great, and right now I'm the general manager in the GE Aviation space for the sourcing organization. So it's great to be here.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Naveen Agarwal. So I actually am the Chief Customer Officer at Prudential. What does that mean? My team thinks about customers end to end. So whether it's marketing, whether it's digital, whether it's data, we combine all of them in one place. I have a very weird background to be at Prudential. Frankly, my background connects many of the thoughts here. So my first job out of school was working on an inventory management system for Ford. And the job actually took me to London. So I was kind of born in India and kind of 21 years old, went to London to do my first company. And my first company was a utter disaster. After 2 years, we realized that we did everything wrong. And that was good learning. And somehow I got into the world of derivatives. And you think about like a typical stereotype Asian male guy, math is easy, let's figure this out, right? And you can make money by doing math, well, that's even better. So somehow that got me into derivatives. So I did my first company in London, moved it to New York, and this is way back in 93, 94. The environment in New York versus the environment in Silicon Valley, especially if you're raising money, is quite different. So moved the company to Silicon Valley in 95. We sold that company to a company called SunGard, did another company in risk management space. That company went through an IPO, and we sold that company again to SunGard. After that, I was president of E-Trade for about 8 years. So that's think about from like deep risk management to consumer marketing, consumer trends, understanding how do you really create a very disruptive brand. Because if you think about financial services, we used to run ads like boot your broker. I mean, think about like what does it take to do something like this? Or we'll say, somebody will win the lottery, just not you. So those kind of campaigns running through that. So it was a little kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of kind of making people believe that this can be done. From there, went into digital photography, completely different thing. And this is way before Facebook and everything else came. If you guys remember those flip phones, which were really cool, they were called Motorola blue things, like Star Trek, and looked really cool to kind of hold on to. That time, we introduced a company in digital photography. So if you guys have seen those picture frames that can rotate pictures and things like that, we used to actually be able to share pictures across devices. And that was on a 64 kb line. So if you think about the little phone line, America Online kind of technology. So that company was sold to Kodak. And Kodak killed that company, right? Because Kodak had the most digital patterns of anyone else in the world. But Kodak thought that going digital is a bad idea. it was disrupting their print business. So it was kind of an interesting learning experience, from the context of Kodak, and then I was at E-Trade and and here's my little journey. Prior to Prudential, I also did a company in the energy space. So this was a company which was trying to make sure that, I don't know if you guys know this, but if you think about how energy comes to your home, it's actually a very complicated journey. Right? So if you think about it, gets really, really cold in Boston. There's a really thin pipe through which all the natural gas has to flow. And in that time, the tariff on that pipeline could be 5x, 10x. Right? How do you build homogeneity in that kind of trading environment? And the person who actually buys that energy is probably a person at director level, makes about $120,000, but they have been to more Super Bowls than any one of you combined. And the reason is they get treated really, really well by the energy companies. So the idea was, could you take that entire $1 trillion market and move it online? So we were trading billions of dollars of energy on this platform, and I sold that company before joining Prudential. So that's my little background.
That's exciting. So what do you guys think? It's a pretty diverse panel, right? I think it's really exciting when you think about 2D kinds of people that are both diverse in their ethnic background, but also diverse in their experience. One question I have is, Janice, you've been in a lot of industrial companies, but as you said, automotive and heavy industry and aviation is a little bit different. So I wondered if you could share anything about how you have actually taken your diverse experiences and actually not stayed stable, but have you brought past experiences into these roles to actually create innovation and take your experiences from place to place and really make a difference?
Sure. It's a great question. I guess for me, I feel like I learn every day. Mm-hmm. I'm still learning. And I always try to draw a thread of some experience. And like you said earlier, Moni, is that we are a product of our experiences and environment and not just our kind of cultural background. I look at some of the experiences that I had very early in my career, have stayed through, and I just build on that. I'll use an experience that I had very early in my career. I was working at General Motors at that time, and I was like 2 years out of college, and I was put into a development assignment to go be a shop foreman. Okay, and this was way back in the day. And I'm a mechanical engineer. I thought, what do I have to do on the shop floor? So, you talk about diversity and inclusion and kind of those kind of experiences that stay with you. And I was now supervising a team who I had nothing in common with. Mm-hmm. I'm Asian. They were Caucasian, female. They were all male. I was young, in my early 20s, and they were probably in their 40s or 50s. And completely different environmental backgrounds. I had a college degree, and they came up through trade school. And so it was a very, very different environment. And for me, kind of learning and finding that common ground from others, learning that mutual respect on how do you try to understand others as much as they need to understand you. So while I was the different one, it was also up to me to try to learn from them. And so I take those kinds of experiences. It was the best leadership experience that has stayed with me my entire career. And I've learned so much from that on how do I now tell people what to do when I've never done their job. I had never this was a tool and die maker group, and I had never run a lathe or a milling machine. I had done it in an engineering lab, and now I'm telling them what to do, and I have nothing in common with. But to me, it's about learning through others, and so they help teach me. And they also try to, so I had to reach out to them, but then they reached out to me, and we found that mutual respect. And so learning from that, I've tried to always not just take my own experiences and try to say, how do I add that value? And here I have this engineering degree, and how does it apply? But how do I learn from others to enhance my own personal background to then build on that? So every experience I've had, I think about when I went from automotive into Caterpillar, knew nothing about that industry either, but I had some experiences, but I try to learn from others about this new industry, this new business model, and then just try to take threads of my own experiences and integrate that in and see how it can be a good match and learn from each other.
I think what's interesting is all four of us have just joined new companies in the last 2 years. So, you know, 2 years ago he wasn't at Prudential, 2 years ago she wasn't at GE, he wasn't at Deutsche Bank, and I was at McKinsey. So I think it's interesting. You know, you've been going from Morgan Stanley to Deutsche Bank to now Bank of New York Mellon. How about you? How have you been able to take your diverse experiences and actually make a difference at such different banks? I mean, even, you know, a European bank versus a pretty traditional New York bank.
Sure. So when you work at a bank, it's very easy to feel paranoid. Regulators want you to get smaller. You have high-frequency hedge funds and other new entrants constantly trying to chip away at the businesses that banks have traditionally done. You have new emerging technologies like blockchain that's going to disintermediate you. And you have, of course, the competition between banks, all the G-SIFIs, such as, you know, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and the Citibanks of the world. And the competition is very intense between these banks. So when you work at a bank, you see all these threats around you, and you have to wonder, how do you respond?
Right.
Because a bank also has a large cost profile. You have to have a compliance department, an internal audit department, an operations group. And so you're very cost heavy and you're headcount heavy. So you can't compete against a new entrant or against a high frequency trading firm in the same way that you would compete against another bank. And so you have all these diverse forces, regulations, and client-driven demand, and you really have to step back. And given your cost profile, given your investment appetite, and given your core competency, because to an outsider, all banks may look the same, but we all have very different niche specialization. So you have to understand, who are your core clients, what's your core marketplace, what are you really good at, and then look at the shape of all the threats that are out there, all the opportunities that exist for you, given the niche skills that you have in your bank. And then you have to figure out, because finance is a very technology-driven business nowadays, in my technology role, I have to work with the business heads across a number of businesses. We have maybe tens of millions of dollars that we can invest in new innovative ideas, and we have to figure out, given the fact that the investment period is oftentimes 1 to 2, sometimes 3 years, you have to actually invest now with an incomplete set of information and figure out how that $10 million investment is really going to help the bottom line in 2 years' time frame. And given the amount of change that I alluded to in technology and in the financial industry, you can get it wrong very easily.
Sure.
So the more that you can think laterally, the more that you can think with a diverse set of skills and experiences in order to figure out how is this going to help and shape your client demand and the skills that you want to bring to the marketplace, that is very helpful. If you just think in a very linear way, if you think in a way that is no different than anyone else, I guarantee you that you'll get disintermediated, and whatever you bring to the market is not going to be as relevant as what your competitor has done. So I think diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of skills is really very important in a banking setting.
Sounds like good advice for no matter what industry we're in. We just finished a study at Innosight that we did in 2012, and we just did it again this year. And the S&P 500 came to be in 1957. And so in 1960, if you look at the 500 companies on the S&P 500, their average lifespan as a company was 60 years. Do you know what the average lifespan of a company on S&P 500 is now? And there's $20 trillion of market cap on the S&P 500. It's now 20 years. I mean, Amazon, Google, a lot of these companies have brought down the life. I mean, there's the IBMs and the Fords that have been there 100 years, right? But the interesting thing about it is that one company every 2 weeks right now is falling off the S&P 500. So if what he just said about the ability to be disrupted, it could happen to you. So Kodak actually invented the digital camera in 1974. If you go to Washington, D.C., and visit the Smithsonian Institute, you will see Steve Sassoon's first digital camera. It weighs 8 pounds. It's not as big as a Caterpillar tractor, but it's huge. And he was able to come up with the digital technology in 1974. But you know, as many of the panel members have talked about in terms of being disrupted, Kodak is a chemical business. And it made all of its profits and revenue out of the chemicals that produced your photos. So it was this razor and razor blade kind of business model. Now, actually, Kodak was the first one to have a digital website called, I think, Kodak Moments or something. Yeah. And you could actually you could actually put your photos up there. But you know what the interesting thing is if you did not produce paper copies of those photos in 90 days, they would wipe out all your photos. Now, it's a good thing that when they were going bankrupt, they sold that website to Shutterfly, right? But this is just the whole concept of what he was talking about, that we have to continually, as a lifetime, realize that we could be disruptive, and we have to bring innovation, and we have to be, you know, ready with the competitive threats at all the times, right?
Let me just add
industries.
Yeah, let me just add a couple other examples. Uber today is worth more than BMW. Airbnb today is worth more than Marriott. Facebook is worth more than Disney. And so it's just any industry that you're in, you're at the threat of getting disintermediated from your client base. And the really interesting thing is that Airbnb and Facebook and Uber, they don't own any cars. They don't own any hotel rooms. And yet they've come in a very different approach to actually dominating their particular market space over these traditional companies that have been around for hundreds of years and have hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue that they've earned over those years, and yet the market valuation of these companies are no longer as high as these new entrants. So I think there are threats all around us, and we have to be very cognizant of that.
One of the things that we do, which seems really simple, but Clay just wrote a book called Competing Against Luck, and it's all about the job to be done. So, and you'll see one of his very low-level examples was his team was hired by McDonald's, who wanted to sell more milkshakes. So the thing is if you just want to sell more milkshakes, you might say, well, maybe I should have more flavors, or maybe make them small, bigger, larger, or give a special cup. So the job to be done is that if you do not know the job, your product or service, or that you are doing, there's no way you could know how to get better, or no way to know how you're getting disrupted. So one of the things Teddy said is that when he's making decisions to invest for 3 years from now, nobody knows the future. And basically, business analytics is amazing, but it's analyzing current and historical data. So unless the trends 3 years from now map the historical data, even the best analytics could only help you in real time. So what do you need to do? The job to be done is understand why someone is buying your service. And with the new disruptions, who else could they buy it? So if you need a room or you need a ride, I took a ride today, and you want a clean car, you want somebody to stop in front of where you are and drop you off exactly where you want, you don't want to use cash. Uber has just been a new taxi because they have the job to be done fulfills these emotional and social needs that we have. So I think one of the things that we could all think about in our roles in terms of being disrupted and being innovative is to think about the job your firm is doing, and when you look at all these disruptions, how can you get that job done? So I think you probably do that every day without even thinking about it. Think about the job you guys are trying to do and how to use AI, digital, blockchain, or whatever to do that. What I find is interesting is I met Naveen this morning, and I was at IBM, and we bought 120 companies, and many of them in Silicon Valley. And so when I met him this morning, I said, how could you go from all those companies in Silicon Valley and nothing? I think Prudential's an amazing company, but to Prudential, because it just seems like doesn't it seem hard that you would go from this kind of very high speed, fast pace? But I think taking that background that you had when I talked about 2D diversity, the second D being your experience set, I mean, would you share with the audience a little bit about how you've taken that Silicon Valley experience and how have you popped that into a large Fortune 100 company like Prudential? I think that'd be, because a lot of us in the room are from those types of companies.
Sure. I think, first thing is, if you think in terms of innovation, I think it's kind of thinking a little bit backwards, okay? So if you are sitting in a VC's office in Silicon Valley, when somebody comes in, they don't come to you saying, I want to innovate. They actually come to you saying, I want to solve a problem, okay? Innovation happens as you solve the problem. Sometimes that problem solving leads to failure, and sometimes it leads to success. So think about the person in that kind of doing that little experiment, and there's a glass dome around them. When we see success, we say innovation happened. Okay? So innovation is the exterior view to it. You can't really create innovation. It happens when you solve problems. Right? So it's very critical to understand that. It's like saying, create a viral video. You cannot create a viral video. You can create a video, right? I mean, some videos get viral. I can give you $20 million and say, create a viral video, and many of us will fail, right? And somebody can take a picture of a kind of a mouse eating a pizza on a subway station, and suddenly that becomes viral, right? And all you did was take a picture from your phone. So that's one notion that we need to know. So problem solving exists in small companies and large companies alike. Right? So the issue is, how do you actually create innovation or disruption at scale? And that's hard. Why? Because most CEOs or most founders are actually a little crazy in their head, right? I mean, if you're not crazy, you can't do things that you want to do. So if you're Elon Musk and saying, well, I'm going to compete with NASA, I'm going to build a SpaceX engine, that's a hard thing to do. When you go to a large company, to create a conviction that building a spaceship is a great idea, right? When you go to 50 people, which you hired yourself, you can create that conviction quite easily because they actually joined because they believed in that message. Otherwise, they would have not joined you. When you go to a big company already has well-defined rules. This is how we operate, right? And when you go and you say, well, I have this great idea in my head that I want to fight with a spaceship or make something like that, that's not acceptable, right? So to bring that level of change at scale, it has to be done at several levels, right? And I think I want to try that back into diversity. It's the diversity of thought that you need to first bring into that thinking. And our backgrounds, I think, when you're talking about the 2D, which is the first dimension being the notion that when you're born as a diverse person, you actually have different genetically you're wired differently, right? So that's one part of the D. And second part of the D is things that we acquire. So the notion that if somebody were to spend 30 years in China or when we travel, we acquire those diversity things in our heads. How do we take that diverse viewpoint and permeate that into an organization at scale? So what that requires actually is not thinking the same way, but urging people not to do, but to think differently first, right? Because if you can't get the culture aligned, any work that you're going to do will not pan out, right? So it becomes as much of running an experiment around culture, diversity of thought and experiences, and then tying it back into what are the disruptive forces that are coming into our industry. And I'll tell you, if you think about a company like Prudential, right? So I don't know how many of you have ever bought a life insurance policy, but if you have to buy a life insurance policy, it may take you up to 10 to 12 weeks to know what the price of the life insurance policy is going to be. And by the way, we'll send somebody to your home to poke you with a needle, right? In that meanwhile, right? And pee in a cup, right? That's not a great customer experience by any means, right? If you think about that, right? So how many times you actually went to go to buy a product where somebody will come to your home and prod you and prick you on that, those kind of things. So is there a way we can look at artificial intelligence? Can we look at data whereby we can actually drive a result within a day? Or maybe instantaneously, right? So when you start thinking in those kind of notions, suddenly people realize that, well, wow, this could be done. And then you can say, well, listen, in the notion of taking risk, can we run those experiments almost simultaneously where we can actually send somebody to somebody's home and see what the result comes back with versus we can actually do this to data and see what the results come back with. So defining little experiments actually that could prove the hypothesis that this can be done, this can be disrupted is actually key to driving that cultural change, right? So to me, it's not just about, listen, you have great ideas. It's about creating a framework in which you can bring that cultural diversity of thought, but also create small experimentations that can prove the hypothesis, because a lot of small incremental bets actually make a big bet. The problem in large companies is everybody comes by saying, let me disrupt this. That model never works. So you got to think about small little bets that can actually pave the path for larger bets.
Have you seen, since you've been there in 2 years, a way where a small bet actually paid off, where today that Prudential would not have had that innovation unless that approach existed?
Yeah, actually in many, many material ways, right? So I'll give an example, which is a very simple one. So when my team joined in, we have this massive Prudential.com website. So we had 330 customer-facing websites when my team joined. So think about it. If you have 330 websites facing customers, you probably would not get the best customer experience on that, right? I mean, if you think about it, right? And frankly, Google gets confused because Google has no idea which site to send you to, right? So your search ranking shows up on page number 7 of Google, which obviously is completely meaningless, right? So the notion that how can we take through an organizational structure which has multiple business units, multiple corporates, and build a well-streamlined website and do that in a matter of 6 months is unheard of. So one of the things that we did was we actually would go to a whiteboard. We used to call it a 9-box exercise, where we'll draw a little grid with 9 boxes and say, you have to give us in a half an hour sitting, what are the core messages you want to deliver to your client? And the notion is that a customer probably spends 6-7 seconds max, maybe 2-3 seconds on a page mostly. And if you have 75 different messages, it ain't going to work. If you can figure out 3 or 4 messages, that's all that really counts. So we actually were able to launch our website within a matter of 6 months. And not only that, in the process, we actually eliminated about 80-90 sites at the same time. So that kind of effort, when you show the impact of that, is it builds immense credibility, number one. But second thing is, from a customer impact standpoint, you can immediately start seeing results in terms of traffic volumes and how customers interact with you.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. So the other point I'd like to bring up in our last 15 minutes here is not just having this 2D. So if those of you in the room want to aspire to higher leadership roles in your firms as a diverse person, the experience that these people have shared today, that's the second part of the D. So take and get as many experiences that make your point heard, and that you bring a lot of value. The second thing is there's been a lot of studies done by both McKinsey and you'll see in the Harvard Business Review about the real impact in diversity is having inclusive leadership. So those of you in the room, if you worked for somebody who is an inclusive leader, what it says is that means they let your voice be heard. It means you're in an environment where you feel safe to really share your true opinion. And usually that leader gives you some delegation to actually take your ideas and run with it. That's truly an inclusive leader. So I think we should all aspire to be that. But I'm really interested, have the people in the panel seen a spike in their ability to be innovative and impactful when you worked for a very inclusive leader? And Teddy, have you ever worked for somebody who's very inclusive and you really felt the ability to really put your mark out there, and you felt, that you could go for it?
Sure, absolutely. So nobody has a monopoly on truth, right?
Yeah.
And so that comes about through vigorous debate and analysis and discussion. So at the end of the day, the more diverse opinions you have, and the greater the ability to hone in on ideas and experiences that are compelling, the more that those ideas will rise to the top, and then you can start running with it and trying to figure out how do you actually build on them. So the worst thing in the world is to have everybody who thinks the same way in order to actually end up with an answer, because then what you have actually done is just mutually reinforced each other to come up with the outcome. What we really need is a very diverse set of thought and very different experiences in order to actually get to the truth that we actually know we can put our money behind. And as a leader, we have to encourage that, or else you're really not going to end up with the outcome that you're looking for.
Right. That's great. So, Janice, in your experience in those three firms, does something resonate in your mind about an inclusive leader and how that allowed one of those three big industrial companies to really spike on innovation through diversity?
Yeah. And I think it's, it varies. It's a whole cultural experience. To me, diversity without inclusion is meaningless.
It is.
And to me, there's three levels of that. It's about accepting diversity. It's kind of that basic level. Then the second level, I think, is about embracing diversity. And the third level is thriving on diversity. And that's when you really are capitalizing on the whole reason for having diversity, whether it's diversity of race, gender, religion, or diversity of experiences or diversity of thoughts, is how do you capitalize that and thrive on that? And the inclusion is something that can be conscious or subconscious.
Right.
And we all have our conscious and unconscious biases, and we don't realize it. And it can be anything from how you look, like whether I have all my eye contact with Naveen and don't look at Teddy, or vice versa. So those subtle cues are what makes somebody feel either included or excluded. And even those small body languages can make a huge difference in teams. And so I'm always very conscious of, making sure that not just the eye contact and the body language, but making sure that that I'm not just hearing and accepting other feedback, but how do I thrive on that? How do I thrive on the different sets of experiences within teams? And learning, I go back to, again, my early days of just learning from each other. And to me, that is the power of diversity.
That's interesting. I've heard this saying that said, so diversity programs, there's been a lot of write-ups lately that they don't actually really work. And I think it's her point that diversity needs inclusion. So diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion means you're getting invited to dance. So I think actually, just being invited to, as part of a diversity program is one thing, but actually to have that live and breathe in the way you work. I think that if you have a leader who's behind you, you particularly have some derivative power. And I was interested in how Naveen is making, in an older company coming in late, how do you actually have a lot of impact? And wouldn't you say that the leadership team there, the inclusivity of having you on the team and everything, allows them to drive? I don't know. I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah, Moni, I think it's incredible because without a leadership structure that's helping you thrive, you cannot, right? So I'm fortunate actually to have a company that firmly believes in diversity, right? So if you walk in Prudential, you realize very quickly that if there's a very clear strength, the diversity part is a big strength of the company. And again, to me, like inclusion and diversity is very different, right? Because if you guys go to like a store to buy food, right? There's an aisle which is called Asian aisle, right? You go there, it's actually highly confusing because, I'm like, well, it's diversity but no inclusion because the rice is different for different parts of Asia, right? And just because you have an Asian aisle doesn't mean you have actually an inclusion. It is a more diversity-based thinking. So I think at Prudential, you feel the notion that different groups have their own ways to thrive and they're included. So it comes from understanding that leaders exist everywhere, right? And the fact that if you can bring the right talent and motivate them. I'll give you very simple examples. We're talking about recruiting and hiring. How you write your job resume has an impact. How you write a job description has an impact. So let me give you an example. If you start your job description by saying, I'm looking for a business executive, okay, you will realize that less women apply for that. Very simple. Do not know why. You guys can all think through that. but that's a very simple thing where you can say, I'm looking for a leader. It's very different than say, I'm looking for a business executive, right? So the words that we use matter, right? So the inclusion and diversity part comes from leadership, understanding who you're trying to bring to the table, but also brings to the fact that how do you interact? right? And I think being part of something like Prudential from a diversity standpoint is quite, I would say, exciting, but also it gives you a different level of understanding of how different cultures all meld and create a beautiful future, right? Because if we were all very singular, we probably won't get there.
You know, the hours pass so quickly, and I know you've all heard a little bit from these three. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question before Sigrid pulls us off the stage here? Is there any question that you'd like to ask one of these leaders regarding their experiences or, you know, inclusive leadership styles or anything like that? Okay, there's a question there.
And I've always been sort of fascinated by the conflict between innovation and change and operational reliability and efficiency. And so companies drive innovation within themselves in different ways. Sometimes there's an R&D group. Sometimes there's someone like at Prudential where you're sort of looking at the customer from end to end. Sometimes you're in an innovation group. Sometimes you're in the technology group, so it's given that you're going to be innovating. So I just wonder, do you hire differently? Do you manage differently? Do you structure differently? Because in the end, things have to work. They have to be accurate. They have to work quickly. But then on the other side, change is messy. It doesn't always happen right away. I just feel like there's a little bit of a conflict between the two, and I just wondered if somebody wanted to talk to that.
I could add something there.
Okay.
So I used to work in London not too long ago, and on the London trading floor of a large bank. And these trading floors are very large. They're football size, and you have maybe in excess of 500 people working on each trading floor. And just to take a little detour here, it's actually very interesting because there's actually very quick feedback loops to traders. You make a profit and loss at the end of each day. And if you can do it, if you make a profit consistently, you stay in the seat. And if you don't, then you actually have to vacate that seat, right? And in many ways, that level of feedback actually is very interesting because it goes to show who ends up staying and who, and the composition of the floor then stabilizes to a certain degree. And what I can tell you in the London trading floor that I worked at is that because it was in London, you would think that there's a lot of British or English people on the floor. And that really wasn't the case. They were the vast minority. People from every other country in Europe were there. There were lots of Americans there, and there were lots of Asians there. And lots of people from New Zealand and Australia as well. So you could see that if you just look at from purely a profit and loss perspective, who actually did well and who didn't, and because it's indiscriminate, the profit and loss statement, it didn't care about the color of your skin or the accent that you brought or your educational background. It really showed that the people who tend to, the results show that people who rise to the top, it results in a very diverse culture and set of people. Now, to answer the question that I think was brought here, another interesting thing that I've seen over the 2 decades that I've worked in the financial services in the industry is that because the business feedback loop is very short in terms of, and very quick in terms of the profit and loss statement, you can have people who are very good in a very micro way in bringing in revenue. Today, that type of skill set is definitely not as useful as it used to be, let's say, 10 years ago. And the reason for that is exactly to the question that you were asking. Innovation is really disrupting what we do. So if you just stay blinkered, standing in front of your 6 monitors and looking to trade a bond in and out every single minute of the day, you're really not going to have long-term success in that type of approach. What you really have to do, and what business heads today in finance really need to do, is you need to understand your entire business flow front to back. And so the mental challenge is much greater today because in order to understand both the trading aspect, the technology platform implication, the client impact, the capital and funding impact, and the operational processes, it is a huge amount of detail. But that is necessary in order to figure out how to innovate, what products to bring to market, and how to evolve your trading business to actually bring the most value to the marketplace. And so I have seen a big change in terms of what the requirement is for business heads today in finance, in that the front-to-back knowledge has never been important in order to ensure that they can actually be more innovative in the right way.
Your point before about this lateral and being able to think across the board.
That's right.
Versus just very vertical. Great. And I think we're done with time, but does anybody have one last question? Or, yeah, go ahead. Unless she's going to. And then I think we're done.
This is Peter Hahn from IBM.
Hi.
It was very, hi, Moni.
Hi.
I've listened to all of your experiences. I was very impressed with the amount of movement you all made in your careers. I was curious as to what was your thought process in terms of looking for diverse experiences outside of your companies, and why did you decide to leave your company as opposed to looking for diverse experiences within the companies you were with?
Yeah, I guess for me, I was not, when I moved companies, I was actually never looking to move. And so for me, I was happy where I was, including the last job I had. It was somebody came and intrigued me from outside the company. So I felt that I've never left a job I didn't love. I think that's how I would say it. So every job I've loved, I've always felt that I was learning new things, even within the same job, learning every day. So for me, I feel very fortunate that I've been given opportunities that I wasn't looking for. So.
Just to add to what Janice said, I think one of the things you have to think about is you have 24 hours in a day. What difference can you make in those 24 hours? And if you think big, think as big as you can, because it takes the same amount of time to think small as to think big, right? So the notion is that how do you make impact? And if you realize that there's a place where you can make a bigger impact at that moment of time, embrace it, right? So I think that should drive it. It's not about whether you've been in a company for 3 years or 5 years. There are folks who have been in a company for 30 years, but they've been changing what they've been doing for 30 years, right? And that could be a very powerful motivator because you are actually making impact in a different way. So I don't necessarily think in terms of changing jobs. It's in terms of how are you really waking up every day and feeling you can make a difference. And is that difference the best difference you can make? So think in that context. One quick thing also, wrapping up on the question that you asked previously around business models and reliability and everything, what I would say is think in the context of innovation separately is very hard to do. Because you will get caught up in all the operational and process. So you've got to embed innovation or thinking innovative in the fiber of your business systems. If you kind of leave it as a siloed separate thing, those teams have an average lifespan of 3 years. Okay, because they come and go. It's the whim of the CEO, the person who is driving it. So if you really, really want to change, you have to think about reliability in a troubleshooting way. I mean, a great example of things that are innovative come actually from inside those reliable business systems.
So I know we're out of time and we're going to get jerked off the stage here, I think, but I really appreciate your attention and I really appreciate this panel. I just want to close. Last year at Davos at the World Economic Forum, the Prime Minister of Canada said, diversity is the engine of invention. And he said that it generates the creativity that enriches the world. So our panel hopes that you had some new gems about diversity being at the core of invention of wherever you are, and that all of you today will leave today enriching the world. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.